about 30 seconds.
Okay.
Alright, so why don't we just start early, because every year this lecture gets going, it
Sure.
keeps expanding. This is the compendium of how long have I been teaching this course now? 2011.
Yeah.
Just to date myself a little bit.
Yeah.
And I typically, unless it's really dated, don't take out material, but add to it, because how medicine has changed over the past 14 years is incredible and will continue to change. And so we actually typically don't get through all of the material for this first lecture because it keeps growing, but the stuff that you need to thrive and also do well in the exam will all be presented. So we're going to start with a thought experiment. I want you to fast forward 10 years, imagine that it is 2035, and you aren't where you are currently, but you are in fact a kid named Billy, and you have a day off from school. So rather than doing homework, you decide that you are going to go play a game. And in your virtual reality headset, you are zapping invaders and bad guys. And this is what you see. You're targeting these little Goombas, these invaders, and you eventually off every single last one, and you win the game. But in reality, what you've been doing is zapping cancer cells in a patient's brain. Does that sound far-fetched and beyond imagination? Maybe, but what I want to present to all of you today is technologies on the limits and the very horizons of medicine that may in fact become reality and are in fact becoming reality today. So that was the Two-Minator game. That is your introduction to today's lecture, which is called Engineering Tomorrow, Fostering a Culture of Disruption and Innovation. You will hear more about me and my background, so hang on. So what I want you to get out of today is the what, the why, and the how, and also know all about you. So I want you to get a sense of emerging trends and technologies that will impact the future of innovation and medicine. I want you to get a sense of why it's important and some of the greatest challenges we face in medicine today and will continue to face. A sense of how we get there, how we get to from here to there and applying an innovation mindset. And then finally, I want you to take that and contextualize it in your own respective backgrounds. Okay, so 3 questions that we hope to answer by today. What is innovation? Why does it matter? And how does one innovate? So, question, what is this? Yep, not a trick question. Okay, so second question, what is its use?
Holding up, so you can
Yeah, perfect, okay. Now here's where things get a little bit tricky. What else can it be used for?
Water filter.
Water filter, sure.
Cut it in half and put the sand in.
Say that again.
Then when you cut it in half and put the sand in and you filter it through.
Oh yeah, okay. That's very creative. Haven't heard that one yet. What else?
Kids using it as like a rocket launcher.
Rocket launcher. Excellent. You guys are very creative. What else?
You could maybe have vines or plants growing in there.
Planter. Excellent. Yes. Okay. So this is the beginning of how we start to think differently, because a planter can be a planter, it can be a light fixture, it can be a bird feeder, it can be a jewelry holder, a pencil case holder, a art installation, or even a piggy bank. And so what I want you to start getting used to today is thinking differently. A bottle can also still be a bottle, but it can be engineered differently. Let me just make sure I'm connected to the internet here so my videos work. It's probably the step I should have taken. So we should be connected soon. Great. Okay, now we're going to go back to today's lecture. Okay, so coming back to bottles, We can also use a bottle for its intended purpose, but we can engineer it a little bit differently. So my whole issue with bottles is that they often, by virtue of how they're designed, don't let you access the full amount of product, which is actually quite what you see here. It's a lot of waste, and if you take up all that waste over all the bottles and all the landfills, that ends up being a lot. And so one group out of the MIT Media Lab said, well, why don't we just re-engineer the adhesive properties of the bottle so that ketchup doesn't stick as much to the inside. And so now you're actually making a more efficient bottle. So all of that is to say that whether you're repurposing something or reimagining it, these are all examples of thinking differently. And this is how we're going to start to think by the end of today. So that is your crash course into engineering tomorrow. Now we're going to get into introductions. So this is me. I wear about 17 different hats. What I do on any given day or in any different hour varies considerably. So I am an assistant clinical professor here at the University of Alberta. My name is Shawna. I am also Canada's first commercial female astronaut. I also practice clinically as an emergency physician in aeromedical transport, advise a number of commercial space companies as a medical advisor, as well as do a lot of research in space medicine and innovation, which you'll hear about in this and subsequent lectures. So that's me. Again, a whole lot of a lot of affiliations that if you don't want them in pictorial form are written there for you. So that's me, and now it's your turn. I want to know all about you, so we're going to go all around the room. I want to know what your name is, what your background is, and then what you hope to get out of the course. So we'll start over here.
So hi everyone, my name's Shawna. I'm in my 4th year of psychology here at the U of A. I actually took this course last year. I really enjoyed it. I really especially liked all the space medicine courses with Dr. Pandya. I'm returning to the course as a TA to help out Dr. Solas this year. And my hope is that I can kind of start to think more deeply about the concepts we cover, about these big ideas about AI, and just kind of learn a little bit more about everything that's changing in the field of AI.
Welcome back.
I'm Jimmy. I'm a 5th year cardiac surgery resident here at the U of A. I am in my 3rd year of my PhD in experimental surgery in developing tissue engineered heart valves using stem cells. I'm just naturally interested in AI technology and the future of medicine, so I decided to explore out and take this course.
Welcome. Is this the first time we've had a surgical resident in the course? We've had a spine fellow?
Yeah, it's the first time that all the registered students are graduate students. I mean, it's a graduate course, but it's been mainly taken by undergraduates. Yeah, so it's a very special group of students.
Yeah, that's a great background. At some point, if we have time, we can talk about stem cell 3D printing in space, because there's a lot of novel applications for that. And last but not least.
My name is Leanne. Just whatever Jimmy said -1, so I'm a 4th year cardiac surgery resident, my 2nd year PhD. And my project is looking at ex vivo lung perfusion and lung transplant. And so trying to improve our current protocols to preserve lungs outside the body for longer periods of time and hopefully improve them. And then for this class, so I mean my project is kind of a bridge between the clinical and innovation technology, and so that's one of my interests too. And so I'm interested to see how we can integrate.
Fabulous, and suddenly the coffee cups make a lot more sense.
Yeah.
All right, so let's talk about innovation. What is it? If we had to define it, if you had to throw something off the top of your head to anyone, again, I will pick on you, this is meant to be a very interactive class, so if you had to define innovation, what would you say it is, Fran?
Coming up with new ideas, advancements.
Coming up with new ideas, okay. What about, is it?
Jimmy.
Jimmy, what is it?
Innovation, new technological advances that changes how we live today.
Okay. Does it have to be technological?
It doesn't have to be.
Right.
But I think that's a big part of it.
Sergio, you've been through this class, you can opt out if you want, you're the TA, but what would you say?
I would say building on current knowledge to just optimize current technologies.
Yeah, building on existing ideas. So when we talk about innovation. It can be a new technology. It can be building on existing technologies, and I'm dating myself here by proving I was alive during Windows 95. And it can be hardware, it can be software, it can be futuristic ideas like flying cars that currently exist today. That's a GIF that should play. It's not going to. And it can be creating new industries around ideas that haven't existed previously. So here are concepts for flying cars.
The future has arrived. Or at least its prototype has. The aircraft took its first intercept journey in Slovakia, in the city of.
So the interesting thing when I first started teaching this course 15, 14 years ago, there was only one concept for a flying car that was actually a prototype that was being tested called Terrafugia. In the last 2-3 years now, there's concepts all around the world that are applying for licenses, getting FAA clearance, that have different car aerodynamic hybrid properties. And so it's really interesting to see the exponential increase in that. So we don't have to watch the whole video, it will be there in the slides. Okay, and so just to give you an idea, at the Consumer Electronics Show, which is a big technological gathering in Las Vegas every January, so where newest technologies are debuted, this is kind of the diaspora of flying cars. And then how they intersected with novel technologies like AI. Okay, so we talked about technology, but it can also be different applications of technology. So drone technologies, I just came back from an emergency medicine conference in India. They're using drones for surveillance and remote administration of CPR to guide bystanders with no previous knowledge in CPR to be able to perform the adequate depth and rate of compressions. They're using it for disaster surveillance in case studies. Here you can see drones being used for food delivery, for fun, for photography, and for Amazon package delivery. It's coming up with ideas that don't necessarily make sense, like your furniture being smart and deciding that you need to be more comfortable, so your ottoman coming to you. And innovation can also be, again, novel applications of new technologies. So 3D printing, in a way that you never would have thought it would have been used before. So this is where someone did the 3D modeling of a sneeze and then took the sneeze particulate, modeled it, inputted it into the 3D printer, and took what could be disgusting and took the sneeze particulate and turned it into a vase and a flower art installation. 3D printing for food, so you can have your face and eat it too. 3D printing for tissues. And 3D printing in novel environments, like in the space flight environment, and 3D printing for prostheses. So here you have a turtle with pyramidalism. I always struggle with that. Being given a whole new lease on life because he or she has a turtle a shell prosthesis. Okay. Innovation can be seen in materials science. So here is an example of a novel polymer that is used for oil spill cleanup, and it is able to absorb many more times its weight in the oil spill, and it's reusable. So here's what that looks like. So as we get into the last part of this lecture, when we talk about mindsets and developing innovation mindsets, we'll talk about how do we get to looking at something as a problem space and seeing it as an opportunity space. great that we have surgery here. I don't need to warn you about the gory pictures. It's also looking at novel methodologies. So this was a case study out of China where a factory worker was unfortunate enough to have a hand severed in a factory accident. They found that the severed hand was still viable, and so while the stem healed, they gave it its own blood supply by temporarily grafting it onto the leg, and then were able to successfully reimplant the hand. And innovation continues to happen. So like I said, this lecture continually grows because I'm always trying to find what's new and novel in the headlines and then include it into the lecture. And so just a few years ago, we saw the first pig-to-human transplant. So that had never been done, xenotransplantation, very relevant to your field. Of course, unfortunately, that patient died, but it was a first proof of concept. We're seeing that with corneal transplants now as well. The field continues to evolve. And then we're starting to see new environments in which we can apply previous questions. So you'll learn more about this in the space medicine background, but this is kind of where I live in space medicine, looking at microgravity as a research laboratory. And now that we're living in the era of more access through commercial spaceflight, we see companies like Virgin Galactic and Blue Origin making space more affordable, more accessible, and then also giving access to more uninterrupted microgravity time to perform key research. And also in the orbital sphere, we're seeing companies like SpaceX and Axiom do the same with access to the International Space Station, as well as in the SpaceX Crew Dragon free flyer. So I alluded to this, Jimmy, after your introduction and interest in stem cells and 3D printing. So this is kind of the hot topic in space right now. So there is kind of a gold rush for pharmaceutical development in space right now. And the reason is because protein crystals grow more slowly and more symmetrically in the microgravity environment without having to fight against 1G. And so a success story that's being touted is Merck, the pharmaceutical company, invested $14 million of R&D up front to develop Keytruda, which is a known chemotherapy agent for mesothelioma, head and neck cancer, cervical cancer, and their patent is expiring in the next year and a bit. And so they thought, well, what if we could make a different formulation in microgravity? Currently, if you need chemotherapy with Keytruda, you need to spend at least a day of your life in the hospital getting an IV infusion. That impacts quality of life, that has costs for the healthcare system. This formulation needs to be refrigerated. With this new formulation that they developed on the International Space Station, they managed to develop a formula that was bigger with the crystals that they grew. As a result, the viscosity was altered, it was more shelf stable, it did not need to be refrigerated, meaning now that the impacts have both positive impacts for patients as well as the healthcare side. So you can, if you're a savvy patient, you can either get this administered yourself at home, or have it administered at your doctor's office. Does not need to be refrigerated, and you don't need to spend a day of your life, a month, in the hospital getting this infusion. So here's the NPJ microgravity write-up on Keytruda pembrolizumab for those who are interested. And so the arguments for stem cell development as well as 3D printing are similar. And this is kind of a very interesting era. This lecture has evolved tremendously, I'd say, over the past 4 years, because we're seeing all of these exponentially increasing new domains and technologies. So we'll talk about AI in a couple slides, but it's also VR, AR, the metaverse. It's also novel environments, like we just talked about space. And in the VR lecture, if I end up giving it, if I'm around, you'll hear about healthcare applications of virtual reality. Speaking of intersecting streams, so blockchain crypto has been obviously used for cryptocurrency technologies, but is also being applied to healthcare for increased security for everything from patient records, for example. Okay, AI. I cannot give this lecture in this day and age without talking about AI, so let's talk about it. what are the applications for healthcare? And so even this has really become a big topic over the past 2 years. There's now dedicated newsletters around AI and its applications. Dr. Penguin is a good one. And so what can we use AI for? We can use it for diagnostics, we can use it for early detection, we can use it for auditing and improving patient outcomes. Oh, how did I skip there? There's a lot more AI to come, I don't know where it went. We can use it for charting even. So this is being used and deployed in American emergency rooms. I would love for it to be applied here. But we are seeing AI assistance in the room with the patient, with the doctor, and then being able to summarize the interaction as a chart. And then you just have to go and edit it. So let me just skip through and figure out where my other AI slides went. And then we'll come back. Oh, okay, we'll come back to them. Hold that thought. Okay, so let's talk about frameworks. This is actually really interesting. I've never had an all medical crew before, so some of this will be review. Maybe you'll go back into flashback to your med school interview. Okay, so the World Health Organization definition of health. I heard this in second year med school here at U of A, and it's stuck with me since because it's a really powerful way to look at health. So oftentimes we look at health as curing disease. The WHO definition looks at not just merely the absence of disease, but the presence of psychological, physical, mental, and sexual well-being. And so it's important to remember the not just surviving, but thriving aspect of being human, which we often forget when it comes to medicine. Okay. Other frameworks, so there's the NIH model, there's the 5P model, which is actually 6P, so predictive, personalized, preventative, point of care, participatory. So how does medicine need to evolve? How can we get to patients earlier in their disease state? How can we make patients more involved in their own healthcare? How can we make diagnostics more accessible to them? CanMed's competencies. This is where I said you might flash back to your med school interviews because we've all been asked that. But what does it take to be a professional physician in Canada? You have to be a communicator, a collaborator, an academic, a leader, a scholar, and a health advocate, and that's what makes up an expert. And then, of course, there's international frameworks. So the World Economic Forum has talked about an emerging technology framework in healthcare, looking at smart care, universal portable care, empowered care. That comes back to the participatory aspect of patients involved in their own care, and then intelligent healthcare, which especially in the age of digital health and AI is obviously a component of that. So again, this is review for most of you. Principles of Canadian healthcare is portable, universal, accessible, publicly administrated, and comprehensive. So that's specific to this country, and of course the pillars of medical ethics: non-maleficence, beneficence, justice, and autonomy. So this is all just to kind of point to the constraints within which we operate, which can actually also sometimes drive innovation, as you'll see. Okay, so what is wrong with medicine these days? Let's talk about opportunities and problem spaces. So we have all lived through the pandemic, so I don't need to belabor that. But we've seen the rise not just of infectious disease and pandemics and tripledemics with influenza and RSV coming into the mix. We've also seen the rise of misinformation, folks not wanting to be part of public health measures. We also see this all the time. I practice rural emergency medicine, rurally accessibility to the state of the ideal state of healthcare delivery isn't always possible, so I do not have access to the same healthcare diagnostics, specialist access, imaging in a small rural ER that we do here at a big hospital at U of A. And then there's also social trends. So since the pandemic, this is universal, whether you're talking about Canada, India, the UK, US, Australia, we've all seen increases in volumes and acuities since the pandemic, which is kind of putting increased strain on the healthcare and threatening for healthcare collapse. Have you guys seen that clinically since the pandemic? More acuity? late
Definitely,
conditions?
like, because we've kind of, I think for us, we've kind of seen like, like, it's been kind of rolling over, so like patients that were delayed during the pandemic were coming in sicker.
Yeah.
But then because they were more sick and more acute, then it kind of pushed the patients that would have been elective down the line, and then they end up getting worse and getting sicker and more
Spirals.
acute, and so it's kind of just continued.
Yeah,
I think it's been alleviated a bit, but at least even a couple of years ago after the pandemic was over, we were still
I'd
seeing
say the last month is probably the first time I'm starting to see some of that abate, but definitely in the emergency rooms, we've seen that for sure. Okay, so trends and challenges. So to that point, preventative healthcare becomes harder when everything else is suddenly delayed and everything becomes an acute issue. So coming back to that idea of accessibility, remote and rural care, my bread and butter is certainly an example of that. And then we'll talk about a few case studies with antibiotic resistance, drug repositioning, and then incorporating new technologies, patient context, and we'll go from there. Okay, so this is review because we all lived through it. So this is an example of where crises became opportunities. So we were all around for COVID, well, many of us have blocked it out, but in the early days of COVID, folks were looking at how can we make people safer? What are novel masking ideas? So here's one example that made it out early in the pandemic, to the mass rollout of COVID mRNA vaccines. That scale and that quickness of mass rollout had not been done before, which I think was a real success story in helping eventually come out of the throes of the pandemic. The challenges were, of course, the increased mutations, wave after wave, convincing people that masks were in fact an effective measure and not an affront on their personal freedoms, which we still see. And then, of course, like I alluded to earlier, the trifecta of when COVID, RSV, and the flu teamed up. Those were some rough winters there. So the opportunities, though, this is actually an example of a rapid test out of Germany or Europe, somewhere there, where it's helpful when you can have a COVID rapid test, but it's even more helpful when you can have a test that looks at all of the major circulating viri. So that's one example of an opportunity, and of course the challenges that we talked about is healthcare system collapse. Okay, so this is where we're going to come back and talk about AI. So emerging opportunities with AI, I thought it most appropriate to ask ChatGPT how it thinks it would apply AI in healthcare. And so we talked about some of this already: medical imaging, diagnostics, personalized medicine. We haven't talked about drug discovery and development yet, but we'll talk about some projects and computer modeling that have helped advance drug discovery. Can be used for remote patient monitoring. We talked about virtual health assistance, and it's now being applied even in robotic surgery, workflow administration, and mental health supports. Although if you've looked at some of the reports coming out in mainstream media lately, you'll see that it's a very double-edged sword, and that the downside of non-medical AIs and general AIs is that they often tell the user what they want to hear and then can reinforce harmful thinking patterns and oftentimes have bad outcomes when it comes to mental health. Okay, so this was the genesis. Once upon a time, this was in the early days of AI. This was Watson in the early 2000s, or mid-2000s, I should say. And it was initially developed by IBM to be this adjunct to healthcare, but really ended up going and winning on Jeopardy. So we've come a long way since then. So how important is AI nowadays? We cannot get away from it. So New England Journal of Medicine has its own dedicated AI segment now. There's dedicated courses and certifications on AI. It's being used on everything from triage and cancer detection to diagnostic imaging. It's being used in hemonc, pathology, radiology, and ophtho, and even for patient selection in clinical trials. So let's talk about the downsides of this. We talked about some of that with mental health already. There's privacy concerns, ethical concerns, accuracy concerns, oversight, liability concerns, and then of course regulatory, which is kind of twofold, both being able to being able to catch up with the rate of innovation and the rate of which AI is changing, but also regulatory not being so restrictive as to keep AI from doing genuinely helpful things. And then we talked about this a little bit, so on the reliability aspect, who is responsible when AI makes a mistake? And then how can it perpetuate bias in diagnosis and treatment? So one very famous example is dermatology and determining what is a malignant lesion. And so when you look at data sets and you look at does this look like melanoma or not, you can say, well, yes, look at the AI will say, well, yes, look at this lesion, but oftentimes if you look for the source of bias, it'll look for adjuncts like, is there a ruler beside the pathology specimen, which we will only tend to see if there's a more concerning lesion. So it's important to be aware of sources of bias. So this is a headline from this month. It's what happens when AI decides to go rogue and make up its own hallucinations? And so this headline seems very dramatic. Doctors are horrified after Google's healthcare AI made up a body part that does not exist in humans. It's actually a lot less dramatic than that. It referred to the basal ganglia as the basilar ganglia, so portmanteau between the basilar artery and the basal ganglia, which I think is forgivable. However, when we think about how these errors can snowball and magnify, and at the end of the line is a patient's life, I think it does merit being taken seriously. Okay, so that's it for AI. Let's talk about other forms of intelligence. So I do like to talk about AI because it encourages us to think differently. And this is a news article from 2015. It is still in this deck to this day because it's just such an interesting case study of how we can think differently. And so animals are different, they have different senses, different ways of perceiving the world, and pigeons are very much the same. They can see into the UV spectrum. And so pigeons were trained to recognize breast cancer in breast cancer pathology slides. And they were rewarded with birdseed when they got the diagnosis right. And this is why I often joke that Kim's job is at risk to the birds, because in studies the single lone pigeon was as accurate as a trained pathologist at detecting breast cancer in these slides, and the accuracy went up when we flock sourced the answer to a whole group of pigeons. So it's not just artificial intelligence, it's also animal intelligence, which we can think about. We do see this a little bit early in the days of COVID. Dogs were used for sniffing out COVID. We see rats used for landmine detection. There are cases of guide dogs, therapy dogs being used for seizure detection, hypoglycemia detection, and even early Parkinson's detection. So this is what I mean when we talk about using what is in the world around us to think differently. Okay? So let's talk a little bit about antibiotic resistance. We've all seen it. If you practice clinically, it is increasingly scary because what were considered big gun antibiotics when I trained are now still big gun, but there's increasing resistance, and they may not be the first line for sepsis, for example. So it's happening everywhere in every corner of the world, in every clinical specialty. It's especially accelerated since the 1950s. We see this both with inappropriate antibiotic usage and prescribing, and sometimes the patient will insist this needs antibiotics even if we clinically don't think so, and it might be that they're non-compliant. They may take the antibiotics until they feel better. So there's multiple contributors to why antibiotic resistance is increasing, and so sometimes you see these scary CNS reports where there's all R's, all resistance down the line, and then we have to go talk to our friends in infectious disease and get the antibiotic that's kind of hidden in the Fort Knox and behind the glass, and get the really expensive stuff that we only use when it's break the glass kind of emergency. So 2015 was a really interesting breakthrough in antibiotic resistance because we saw the first breakthrough in decades where tixobactin, which is previously not used or previously not really discovered because it was made from a microorganism in the soil that was really, really hard to culture. And so now we see teixobactin in lab study, because now we have better and more advanced culturing methods to be able to access it. Okay? So the next case study we're going to talk about is drug repositioning and how we get to drug discovery. And so this is a little bit dated. So this is from a collaboration between Stanford University and Hewlett-Packard, and talking about how we can use existing drugs for different purposes based on their 3D configuration, and kind of making like this speed dating matching service, but for drugs and receptors. And so examples of this, they refer to it as Match.com for drug discovery. And examples of this, they found that cimetidine, for example, very common heartburn drug medication, could be used for specific types of lung cancer, or Topamax, used for chronic pain, used for migraines, could be used for inflammatory bowel disease. And so that was kind of the basis of the study, and now in the age of AI, adding that second layer of technological innovation as an intersection, this computer modeling for drug discovery is further accelerating. So examples building on personalization. Who here has ever worn a cast? Anyone? No. Consider yourself lucky. Who here has known someone who's worn a cast? Yeah, do they look comfortable? No. They can get wet, they're itchy, they're smelly. If you're wearing them this summer, they're awful. I say that having seen people wear casts. I haven't worn one myself. And then when you've molded it, you've accidentally left a dent there, patient forgot, accidentally kind of weighed it down, they have this uncomfortable dent. So it can be like that for weeks. And so in the era of 3D printing, there's been some studies about 3D printed casts where they are aerated so that the airflow can get in, they don't get smelly, they don't get hot. They are molded to exactly the patient's anatomy, so they're more comfortable. And then they are dishwasher safe, so you can have a pair, swap it out, and be able to keep it clean as well. And so then someone said, well, what if we could not only have a more comfortable cast that's water resistant, what if we could also accelerate healing? So on the far panel over here, you can see ultrasound, high frequency ultrasound being applied to accelerate bone healing, and in this particular series showed about a third rate faster healing of the fracture. Okay, so we also see personalization in this era. We're seeing genomics. So this was a study out of Harvard University where they took the overall genomic report of a patient. Doctors don't have time to parse all that data, so they created a one-pager report with the pertinent clinical aspects. So are you more sensitive or less sensitive to this drug? In the era of warfarin, which we don't really see anymore, will you need a higher starting dose of warfarin or a lower starting dose? Are you more sensitive or less sensitive to metformin, for example? All of which can help make clinical decision-making more personalized towards the patient. Okay? And then finally, the non-technological aspect that it's so easy to forget about in medicine, just the patient context and lifestyle, but bringing that to the forefront to help us inform medicine and give better care to our patients. And so this was out of Duke University, I believe, and it was a really interesting finding when we look at MI risks and the association between divorce. So divorce is a significant risk factor for MI. I guess we all knew that. We could have all predicted that. But when we look at gender-specific differences, the risks associated with multiple divorces are especially high in women and not reduced with remarriage. So that might be an interesting finding that might, if we're a family doctor, for example, we might do closer cardiac surveillance or testing and screening on our patients who we know have that lifestyle risk factor. Okay, so other case studies and other examples of novel technologies. This, hopefully I'm not giving anyone any flashbacks of the pandemic. This is something that was really familiar to all of us about 4 years ago, is when all of our workspaces, learning spaces were reduced to the virtual world. And in fact, we gave this class virtually during the early days of the pandemic. I think that's when we had the highest enrollment. And so how does that translate? How does the application of virtual and remote instruction, teaching, how does that translate to potential applications beyond the pandemic? So if we end up scheduling a VR lecture, you'll hear more of this. But so, like I said, I advise a number of companies. I work with a number of companies. This is a Canadian company called Luxonic Technologies that leverages augmented reality, mixed reality, virtual reality to both use healthcare for making diagnostic imaging more accessible and making healthcare training and certification more accessible. So in this particular scenario, I'm in a remote environment. I'm in an underwater habitat that's a lagoon outside, and I'm reviewing the complex comminuted scapular fracture of a simulated trauma patient with the head of radiology in Saskatoon, Canada, over 4,600 kilometers away, because we're in the same remote radiology reading room in the virtual world, and you can get a glimpse of it there. And so this was down in the Florida Keys. Okay, so we've talked a lot about pathology. Let's talk about performance. What if we could make ourselves better? So DBS, deep brain stimulation, has a lot of applications, can be used for anything from Parkinson's disease to obesity and hyperalimentation to refractory depression. But what happens when you're a few millimeters off? That's a big mistake to make, especially as a brain surgeon, but it does happen, and it happened in this case. This was used for a patient in, I forget what the initial indication was, but in this particular case, they were able to demonstrate memory enhancement with specific DBS stimulation of the entorhinal region. So that's in the New England Journal of Medicine. So in this era of increased technology, people's imaginations say, well, what if we could make this better? And so we also see that with Neuralink, which is giving patients with significant impairment from stroke, from paraplegia, quadriplegia, some of their life back, but there is also a downside of that. So this was an expose by Wired talking about how the primate studies were heavily flawed. There was a lot of pain, a lot of infection that happened that shouldn't have happened during the early days of Neuralink testing. Okay, so before we go on to the next section, we're just going to summarize some of the emerging trends in medicine, because I know everyone who comes to this course has something that really excites them about medicine. Maybe it's AI, maybe it's big data, maybe it's 3D printing. And so we have trends on the clinical side that have always been there that are being more amplified. So we talk about wanting earlier prevention, more pinpoint and precise prevention for our patients with early detection. We want better chronic disease management, because that is the thing that's really going to tax the healthcare system over the next 30 years, that combined with longer lifespans and an aging population. But there's also different technological trends that can help ameliorate those conditions, whether it's 3D printing, big data, geolocation, smartphone apps for patients to be more involved with their own care. We see that in primary care all the time for weight loss, calorie tracking, fitness tracking. And then the emergence of AI, VR, and faster, better, cheaper, smaller, which is what we want in anything that's procedural and more invasive. Okay, I'm going to pause there. Any questions, comments, concerns? I'm just going to also do a time check. Okay, so we've talked about problem spaces, we've talked about crises, we've talked about opportunities. Let's talk about pathways to innovation. How do we get there from here to there? Okay, so we're going to talk in this section about people, mindset, environment, and experience, and what each of those can do to foster innovation mindsets. Okay, so let's start with people. Okay, so when we talk about innovation, we talk about doing so in teams in a very cross-disciplinary fashion. You guys know this, you're in the OR all the time. If it was just you, would you be able to do the surgery? The anesthetist was like, I'm out, I'm on vacation. Scrub nurse is like, no, you guys are on your own. Would you be able to do it? No, it'd be a bad day, it'd be a bad day for all involved. So we need teams to be able to achieve our outcomes. And so this is, maybe I should have known my audience a little bit better. I should have said you don't need to be a cardiac surgeon and a rocket scientist as well. You need folks who come from different disciplines. You need folks who come from the technological side, the engineering side, the basic science side, the clinical side, as well as maybe the socioeconomic side. So this is both a teamwork and a leadership model as well. So when you're working in these teams, how are you thinking about how you're going to progress to your goal? And so when we talk about being a good teammate and a good leader, it's easy to often think about leadership as being the one at the front of the room, the one who's leading the pack, the one who's in the OR leading the surgery. But truly, if you're being the good leader, you're also being the mortar between the bricks. So why do I use this model? Because when we think of a brick wall, we think of strength, we think of something that's solid, but we think of the bricks. So we think of the mortar between the bricks. And if we took out all that mortar, there would be no strength to those bricks. There is no mortar to create those bridges and those links. And so when we talk about the mortar between the bricks model and how that affects us as teammates and leaders, we're looking for gaps. We're looking for places where we can apply our own experience to fill in, to help the team, to help achieve our goal, and then also to build those bridges between other seemingly unlike things. Okay, so we're going to move on to mindset now. What is an innovation mindset? So simplest one is question everything. If you were to walk out of this lecture right now and say, what is the 2-word summary that you could give me of how I could start thinking more innovatively, I would just say, ask the questions, what if? So you can say, how can this be better? What is inefficient about this? But then you can also remove all constraints and say, what if? So here's an example. This is a case study of 18-year-old Anya Bulgarian. She was volunteering in a hospital and she was working on the dialysis unit, and we all have seen those things that are the size of refrigerators. She said that's very big, cumbersome, expensive, and is not portable. So patients have to come to the hospital, or if you're in a resource-limited area or disaster zone, your life could be at risk because you can't get dialysis. So I definitely did do this when I was 18 on my summer vacation. She redesigned a smaller, more portable, suitcase-sized dialysis unit that was orders of magnitude cheaper for patients to be able to receive dialysis within their home. Okay, so let's talk about the what-if mentality. I talk a lot about this. This is in here for your viewing afterwards. I've included some of my TED Talks on innovation mindset and discovering exploration, but they're for reference. We won't go through them today. Okay, you guys may or may not know this. Do you know who this guy is? Anyone? This is Ignaz Semmelweis. So he was a physician in the 19th century, and he had a crazy idea that he was ostracized for, and he said, I have this idea to reduce infection. And they said, sure, doctor, lay it on us. What is it? And he said, what if before we attended to the maternity ward after being in the mortuary dissecting dead patients, what if we washed our hands? And they said, no, that's crazy. What are you talking about? And of course, we all know this today, that without washing our hands between patients, without scrubbing for the OR, we know that infection rates will go up. So this was Semmelweis's groundbreaking innovation in medicine that we still use to this day. It wasn't a technological solution. It required a major mindset shift. But the world wasn't ready for this during his time as a physician, and in fact, he spent the rest of his days in isolation in an asylum because nobody believed him that there were these microscopic things that we couldn't see that were causing patients' deaths. It had to be something else. And so it's quite tragic, but he has this kind of hopeful parting quote that says, when I look back upon the past, I can only dispel the sadness which falls upon me by gazing into that happy future when infection will be banished. The conviction that such a time must inevitably occur, sooner or later, will arrive and cheer my dying hour. So this is kind of the importance of realizing where the mindset comes in and realizing where people may or may not be ready to accept innovation. And so we also see this today. These days, how many of you video chat with your friends, FaceTime? Yeah, No, you guys are antisocial. But it's a lot more common these days, right? To just simply FaceTime someone. Whereas video phones have been around since the 70s, but both the infrastructure as well as the social ease of which and normalization of which we would FaceTime folks wasn't there as well. Okay, so we're also going to talk about disruption, anticipatory thinking, and exponential thinking. So how do we do that? What does it mean to think exponentially? So thinking of on a treadmill, if we're increasing our rate of speed on walking on the treadmill in a arithmetic fashion, we're doing so in a linear fashion. So you might be walking at 1 kilometer per hour, 1 minute. At minute 2, you'll go to 2 minutes, 2 kilometers per hour, then 3, then 4, then 5. So it's a very slow progression, very easy to keep up, not a big change. Now, what if we were going up in exponential or geometric fashion? So then at minute 1, you're at 1 kilometer an hour, then it's 2 kilometers per hour, but now we're going to double that. So at minute 3, you're at 4 kilometers per hour, you're actually now walking at a normal pace. Then you leap up to 8 kilometers per hour, now you're fast walking. Now you're going to 16 kilometers, you're sprinting, and then at the next doubling, you're 32 kilometers per hour, and you're probably falling off the treadmill. So that's what we mean by exponential thinking, thinking about how we progress not just from the linear fashion of things, but what the trends are in technologies and how that might apply to social applications. Okay, so here's an example in the realm of communications. So when we talk about how long it took the radio to reach 50 million people, what are our best guesses?
I had the slides up.
Yeah, the slides up, okay. Have you looked at the slides, Jimmy? Okay, what's your best guess of how quickly the radio took to reach 50 million people?
5 years.
5 years, okay, not a bad guess. It was actually 38 years, okay. All right, so then in the age of social media, we're in a connected age, digital age. How fast do we think it took Facebook to reach 50 million people? Best guesses, anyone?
2 years maybe.
2 years. It was a little bit longer than, oh, no, it was 2 years. Okay, you're right. I looked at my own slides for a long time.
Pretty good.
Okay. The last Adele video, how long did it take to reach 50 million people?
2 hours maybe.
It took under 20, it took 2 days, and I should have put a Taylor Swift video up there because it would be hours. Okay. So this is what we mean by the rapidly increasing pace of change, because this is what drives disruption. So then how does that translate into practical disruption? So let's take another example. So once upon a time, at least back in my day, when you went to a bookstore, you would just go to a corner store, bookstore. Maybe there were some chains. There were no big box bookstores. And then in the last 30 years or so, we saw the rise of Barnes & Noble, of Chapters, of Indigo. So then that's a one-stop shop. There's so many books there. You're putting the corner store out of business. Then one person came ahead and said, well, what if we just had a big warehouse of books and then we just shipped out the books? So of course came Amazon with their Amazon warehouse, disrupting the big box bookstores. And they said, well, what is the thing that's going to put us out of business? What's even bigger than a warehouse? And that, of course, is the Kindle and ebook. So they, by engaging in this disruptive thinking, they not only knocked out the existing landscape of competitors, they became their own disruptive force with the Kindle and the ebook. So another example, again, dating myself a little bit. Back in the day, if you wanted to go see a movie, you would go to the Blockbuster on a Friday night, you'd go to Rogers Video, you would rent a VHS tape, and then you would bring it back, and then it became the DVD. And then Netflix said, well, what if we could bring movies to you? And so they said, okay, we're going to mail out DVDs, and you just mail them back. And they said, well, what's the next technology that is going to disrupt and that can also put us out of business? And that, of course, is the ubiquity and the increased rates of internet data usage. And so they said, well, what if we became not just a mail-in service, but a digital streaming service? And so they became their own disruptive force once they had knocked out the old video stores and became the first streaming service. And now, of course, they're competing with a very packed field with Hulu and the likes. Okay? So then, as long as we're talking about mindset, let's talk about other mindset shifts that we can engage in. So this is a very real article about a family who were born in the 80s who were concerned that their kids, their 4-year-olds, were becoming too addicted to their iPads. They wouldn't listen to them, they wouldn't come when they wanted to. And so they said, that's it, no technology in our lives. We're living like the year in which we were born. So if we're going to a place, we're using a paper map. If we need to look at photos of our brand new born nieces and nephews, you need to give us a printed photo. We are not going to have any more advanced gaming system than an Atari, and they also dress the part as well. And so that seems like a step backwards, but it's also a way in doing things differently and getting new insight about the world around you. Okay, so Ryan, do you have the slides up for the next slide?
I do not.
Okay, do not look at them, okay? This is where I want your guys' input. So, as long as we're talking about the changing landscape of the world, let's talk about the job space. What are jobs that did not exist 10 or 20 years ago that exist today?
Drone operator.
Drone operator, excellent. What else?
Social media influencers.
Influencers, yes. Yeah, that's another one. Anything else?
I think a lot of computer science jobs.
A lot of comp sci jobs, yeah, and that's primarily what the list is of. So app developers, data miners, big data analysts, SEO optimizers, UX, UI designers, millennial generational experts when I first started teaching this class, and now it's Gen Z experts. Social media managers, as correctly said, digital marketing managers didn't used to be a thing, sustainability and corporate sustainability experts and managers as well. Okay, so that's what didn't exist. What are jobs that do exist today that didn't exist 10, 20 years ago? Or what are jobs that will not exist, that are, what are jobs that are going to disappear because of emerging technologies?
Uber drivers.
Uber drivers, what will they be replaced with?
Self-driving cars.
Self-driving cars, okay, excellent. What else?
I think scribes will be replaced with maybe like voice recording technologies.
With AI? Yeah, okay, great. Anything else?
Software development.
Software development will not exist?
I think like a lot of it will just go to the same thing, like AI that can generate code and develop the software. So you can do it in an hour. You just put an idea in, and it'll make the app for you or make a program for you.
Yeah, and this class has even changed a lot from last year. Okay, so jobs that are disappearing due to automation. So we see this a lot. So travel agents don't exist. Retail self-checkout doesn't exist. We talked about Uber, Lyft. We've talked about word processors and voice recognition. So far, librarians are still hanging out to their jobs, but online search is definitely moving in on that. And now we're actually moving to the era where the jobs that are now starting to exist are themselves at risk. So the social media manager might be replaced by an automated system, like you can have an AI algorithm that optimizes your social media outputs. Okay, so while we're in this thought experiment, what are jobs that don't yet exist that may exist in the next 10, 20, 30 years? That we'd like to see exist, that might become a reality based on emerging trends and technologies? Any ideas?
It's going to be a lot more maintenance of all of these things, so like
Yeah.
maintaining the data centers and
Yeah, as these things become more complex, we will need people to manage bit rot, and I was actually kind of laughing at my slides because the slides get updated, but they were made in the 2011 version of Google Slides, so they are not in the 9:16 format, they're in a very square format. You guys are looking at this on your screens. Okay, other jobs that might exist.
I think maybe like operators or just customer support for all these self-driving cars and things.
Yeah, so maintenance operators, okay. Anything else?
AI systems manager, maybe?
Systems managers, okay. So here's the rate of change. Here's how quickly the landscape is changing even over the time this course has been in existence. Because, so we talked about waste data managers, very well identified. Healthcare navigators, because now in the era of increased medical specialization, we're seeing subspecialists, we're seeing sub-subspecialists, so you may not see the neurosurgeon, you'll see the pediatric neurosurgeon, or you might see the pediatric vascular neurosurgeon, or you might see the pediatric vascular neurosurgeon who only deals with AVMs, for example. So we're in the area of hyper specialization, but that means there's a lot more to navigate. So we will need to see folks who know how to navigate those systems, for example, healthcare navigators. So we're also, with these new technologies, there's new platforms and new opportunities. So virtual reality programmers and coders have seen a lot more business in the past few years. You can be a VR, AR architect. We are now seeing alternative currency bankers, 3D printing engineers, privacy managers, which in the era of social media is very necessary, non-engineering and probably centenarian service providers. And then we're talking about human enhancement. We will see perhaps human enhancement, memory augmentation specialists, extinction revivalists, so Jurassic Park, and then even commercial second generation astronauts. So this is why the list is so interesting, because over the years, I've updated the list a little bit, mostly kept it the same, which means that since 2011, the jobs with stars beside them now actually are jobs. When I started teaching this course, a commercial astronaut was not a thing. I am now a commercial astronaut. So that is the rate of which this, the world that we're living in is changing. So speaking of extinction revivalists, it is literally happening. This is George Church, the famous genomicist out of Harvard. He is building Colossal. They are hoping to take the DNA of the elephant and re-engineer the woolly mammoth with the argument that will help preserve the ecosystems of the Arctic tundra. So that is a very real article. Colossal is still plugging away at its mandate. And I think they also brought together, what did they revive? Was it a wolf in the past year, something like that? So that's where that came from. So where does that leave us with where medicine will be in the next 10 years? I don't think AI is going to go away. Where medicine is going to be more AI-driven, automated. We're going to be seeing more integration of intersecting technologies like AR, VR, XR. How is that going to affect the systems as they exist to improve accessibility? Is that going to make access to healthcare in a public system more accessible? Is it going to accelerate the splintering into a two-tiered system to be determined? Definitely with the rise of AI, we'll see more predictive, personalized medicine. And maybe, we definitely see this today. We are definitely struggling under the burden of chronic disease, aging population, decreased accessibility, increased wait times. So we're going to have this two-pronged approach where prevention and detection gets better, but also dealing and managing and stabilizing patients with chronic disease, especially as the lifespan increases not just from 80 years, but to 90 and probably 100 years and beyond. And so that creates also positions like we talked about earlier for new types of support people, navigators, subspecialties, more personalized, but we also have seen this already with the pandemic, with the rise of wellness influencers, a lot more pseudoscience and a lot more misinformation to fight. And one of the most effective ways, because people are still people and want to know the truth, is if you see a claim that seems too fantastical, as you just go on social media, read the comments, and you see that people are pretty quick to dispel. But we're also seeing folks we're seeing the rise of bots and people who are trying to also create chaos amongst all that. Personal enhancement, we may see some of that. We're seeing some of that. We're seeing people wanting to stay younger. So we heard that 40 was the new 30. Now we're hearing that 50 is the new 40. So people just don't want to age as well. Okay. So we also have issues that were long-standing issues, so issues that were not a priority in 2010, climate change, socioeconomic determinants, so LGBTQ rights, systemic racism. We also see pandemic planning, social distancing wasn't a big priority in 2010. Social media well-being wasn't that big, so didn't need to be a big consideration. So where does that leave us in 2025? Well, the list is unfortunately not changed. So think about these ongoing issues, these crises, not as a crisis, but an opportunity to solve problems as our tools and technologies continue to accelerate. Because here's the reality of the world in which we live today. Climate change is not going away. People are becoming increasingly displaced with the rise of natural disasters. wars, famines. So we see more refugees worldwide, over 50 million refugees worldwide, the first since World War II. We have increasingly accelerated global warming, and then we have ongoing inequities in our system. We see that in healthcare all the time, that women are still treated inequitably when it comes to pain, when it comes to diagnosis, when it comes to recognition of very common maladies. So we know that MIs, for example, present differently in women. And then we see a lot of increasing global problems. So when we talk about bigger global challenges, when we talk about human trafficking, we see more people enslaved today than at any other time in human history, 20 to 30 million people, close to the population of this country. And then we also have opportunities. There's a big planet, but we've only mapped 5% of our oceans to date. We've actually mapped more of the moon than we have of our oceans. Okay? So how do we approach? I don't want you to walk out of this thinking, that was the most depressing lecture I've ever come to. I'm not coming back to the next lecture. Let's talk about the problem-solving frameworks in which we can start tackling these considerations, these issues, whether it's something very, very focused and specific, or something that's very large scale. Okay? So we talked about questioning things. We talked about going about our day and saying, what is inconvenient about this? How can this be made better, and how can I, with my own unique set of skills, make this better? And then what would success look like? What if there was no barriers? What if money wasn't, or time were not a barrier, or technology was not a barrier? We can also look at different frameworks, so design thinking. So as you're all sitting here in your hard plastic, non-comfortable chairs, how could this classroom be made more conducive to learning? The lighting is certainly better than it would have been 20 years ago, but could it be optimized? Could your interface with the learning environment be better? There's also very specific frameworks we can use. So in business, we talk about the SWOT analysis: strength, weakness, opportunity, threat. So if you're looking at a new innovation, how can it succeed, how can it fail, and then what might threaten that success? And then if you're thinking of more acute situations or in problem spaces and how you're going to tackle it, there's something called, this is more for personal and operational environments, the OODA loop: observe, orient, decide, act. Okay. Another one, if you like to think about big picture challenges, so in my bio you may have seen the X Prize mentioned. I'm a member of the X Prize Global Brain Trust for Space and Exploration. And so this is where we try to catalyze large-scale breakthroughs in industry and innovation where they're happening too slowly or they may be too many hurdles. And so how do we get there? We encourage moonshot thinking. The sky is not the limit. We think about abundance. What would it look like if there were no resource constraints? We think about the exponential thinking. How do we get from here to there? How do we make a breakthrough that is 50 years away, only 7 to 10 years away? And then how do we make that sustainable over the long term? Okay, so the other next, we've talked about mindset and we've talked about people, so let's talk about the environment. How do we foster an innovation-conducive environment? So we can actually practice innovation and we can also facilitate the process for others. So there was a study in the Harvard Business Review that looked at business leaders and what made them at the top of their game. And then they looked at 5 key traits. They looked at their ability to question, associate, observe, network, and looked at that compared to the general population. And so what they found, let's get a few slides ahead. It's not there. We'll come back to that later. What they found is that these folks who were heading up major tech companies were more likely to form associations between unlike things. They were more likely to ask those questions. They were more likely to recruit people to work to their cause through networking, and they were also observing. They were going through their environment, through their day, not passively, but saying, what is inconvenient about this? What could be made better about this? So we can also physically engineer our environment to be more conducive to innovation thinking and to facilitate innovative conversations. So this is the layout of Pixar, and very famously it is designed so that you have to walk past the central hub if you want to get somewhere common like the bathroom. And so that facilitates interactions between disciplines that might not normally talk, like the animation engineers and the graphics design department. And that's how they foster ideas and next big innovations and projects. So Google also does this. They have a open floor plan where, again, they want to facilitate conversation. Now, since this first became a big thing in Silicon Valley in the early 2000s, there have been some criticisms against it, against productivity, especially if you're an introvert, you probably don't want to be talking to people all day. But it also does foster that ease through which you might go and ask someone a question or say, hey, what do you think about this? Rather than if you're all blocked off in cubicles or offices. Okay. We can also foster that in this day and age through digital platforms. So this is the most empowering era in which to be alive because of the hardware and the software and the digital media that we have at our disposal. If we want to raise money for our new idea, we have crowdfunding sites like Kickstarter and CrowdSpring. If we want to educate ourselves on something that's totally outside our field, like astrophysics or nuclear medicine, we can take a massive online open course through Coursera, MITx, edX. We can teach ourselves to code through Raspberry Pi. Or Arduino. And then we can also both teach ourselves and broadcast ourselves and teach others through online digital platforms like YouTube, for example, like social media. Okay, experience. This is the last thing that we'll talk about before we break for the day. So this is the Harvard Business Review study that I was talking about, where they looked at 5 key traits associating experimenting, observing, prosecuting, networking. And they looked at the non-innovators, the general population, and then they took business tech leaders, Michael Dell of Dell, Piero Magyar of the Imager Network, Scott Cook, Michael Lazanidi, and they looked at how they fared in all of these. And you can see that they had more curiosity, they had more of a questioning mindset than the general population. Okay? And so innovators come in all forms. We talked about the 18-year-old who designed her own dialysis machine on her summer off. So this is the other end of the spectrum. This is a young lady, a 91-year-old who lives in a nursing home and who found she simply cannot open her medications because these child-safe pill bottles would not let folks with reduced vision, reduced mobility, arthritis open them. So then she teamed up with IDEO, one of the world's biggest design firms, to start designing a more user-friendly pill bottle, and then from there it spiraled into other ways that they could help folks living, the elderly, the advanced age, living in nursing homes, to live better with design. And they just followed simple prototyping principles. Come up with an idea, sketch it out, critique it, present, sketch it further, prototype it, build it, critique, sketch it out, validate it, and then repeat the process. It's not a very advanced process, okay? So summary is question, observe, experiment. So those are the principles of fostering innovation. I know we're coming to the end of time. We have about 8 minutes left today. So I hope that you'll leave the session today thinking that the sky is not even the limit, that whatever big idea you have, whether it's for making the need for anti-rejection medications after transplant obsolete, whether it's creating large-scale change and getting rid of chronic disease altogether, those sound very, very impossible. But there are a lot of tools, innovations out there, and you all have your own respective backgrounds through which you can start affecting change. You already are through your clinical work and your academic work. Okay, so I just want to leave you with a set of 5 theses. This is an amazing time to be alive. It is the most important and most productive time to be someone who wants to create, to discover. There's no endless multitude of problems to be solved in the world, and I want you to think of problems as opportunities, and then realize that there's potential in everything and everyone. Okay, so when ChatGPT first became a thing, I didn't think I would be a very good lecturer if I didn't bring it into the course. So about 2 years ago, I went back and asked ChatGPT and said, hey, I'm teaching a course on technology and the future of medicine. What should I teach in this course? And it gave me a list, and I would like to say that we've hit most of it. We've talked about AI. Remote health, I would say, is not innovative anymore. It's here to stay, but it's often listed at that. We've talked about genomics and personalized medicine. That includes genes and synthetic biology. We've talked about nanotechnology and medicine, 3D printing, bioprinting. We've talked a little bit about robotics and automation in surgery. We've talked about AR, VR, blockchain, and then digital health. So it's nice to see that ChatGPT agrees with my teaching methods. So I hope that we've set out to achieve at least a little bit about what we wanted you to cut out of this lecture, what innovation it is, how we get there, why it's important, and how your own role fits into this. If you want some bonus extra credit homework, here are some ways in which we can go about our day. We'll skip over this for a second, okay? So here are some optional homework environments if you're really interested in flexing that innovation medical. So, or if you're really interested in flexing your innovation muscle. Okay, so if you want to design your own future-looking scenario, like a Terminator kind of scenario that seems impossible but could become a scenario of the future, don't let the impossible scare you. From there, you can reverse engineer and think backwards about how you might get from where we are today to that impossible future. You can pick a sector and develop a future scenario for it. So what will AI look like in 20 years? What will healthcare look like in 20 years? What will the intersection of healthcare and AI look in 20 years? It can be even as simple as going through, as you walk from here to your next destination, taking a notepad and a piece of paper and writing down all of the inefficiencies that you see, but also ways that things can be done better. You can pick on a novel emerging technology that you would like to know more about, whether it's AI, quantum biology, or you can even start listing 10 problems that we have today that did not exist 10 years ago and start thinking about those as opportunities. So remember those questions. How can this be better? How can I make it better with my own experience? And what if? What could this look like if it were successful? So just remember that there's potential in everything and everyone. And just to illustrate that point, here is a video on how bananas can be a keyboard. If it loads. So there you go. There is potential in everything and everyone. I'm going to turn it over to questions now. I think that is actually the fastest we've ever gone through this lecture. Probably helps that we have a smaller class size.
Yeah,
So,
great.
questions at all?
So maybe I could raise, immediacy of some of Shawna's questions. Like, we have never had purely medical students before. We've always had a mix of undergrads and so on. So we're kind of, it provides some opportunities. And if you guys can think of anyone you'd like to see teaching in the class this term, we can do it. There are 2 teaching dates that we don't currently have anybody assigned for. And so the reason, I've often said that in the past, but the undergraduates were thinking, well, I have no idea, Whereas you guys might actually know someone that you'd like to see teaching in this course. If you look back over the years, we've had a lot of very young people, like the Peter Lahi